Hey everyone, welcome to Three Beers Deep for, oh good lord, it is July. Oh, what day is it in July? What day could it possibly be? It's July 6th. How is it already July 6th? I feel like I say that every time I do this because I do it once a week and it's just blows my mind how fast time seems to go. But this is Three Beers Deep, my weekly Q&A show in which you can go to patrickklubbeck.tumblr.com, ask me questions, a bunch of them that I do answer on a daily basis on Tumblr, and then a selection of them come here for this Q&A show that you can watch and listen to. The iTunes version is on inventory management, has a bunch of stuff up there that is audio related. But let's get right into your questions that come right after July 4th. Also, apologies for this coming late. I was gone the whole weekend and didn't have a chance to sit down until just now on Monday night. So here we go. Miglet asks, do you think it's right for publishers to say if a certain game sells well, then they'll release more games instead of franchise? I know that's what's already happens, but with publishers being so explicit about it, it feels like it puts pressure on the consumers in a bad way. Shouldn't it be the other way around? I mean, I know what you're saying. Like it can sometimes feel as though games are held hostage. And well, if consumers don't do this, then then you're not going to get any more of these. But I guess it's all about a matter of tone. It's a matter of like how that's communicated from the creators or the publishers is probably a more accurate term here. In which if a game needs to break even, a game needs to be profitable in order for them to have any incentive to continue making them. So I don't think it's necessarily unfair for a publisher to say, look. I think, it's hard to tell because, the person asking this doesn't necessarily get into exactly what the context for this question is. So, if we're talking about, let's say, like people have been talking about Shenmue, right? Sega, maybe would it have been different if they had come out and said, look, this game needs to sell X amount of copies for us to justify a Shenmue 3? It would have been possible for that to be taken as sort of crass and sort of like, well, you don't do it, then you're not getting that game. But, there is an internal threshold, right? Like, I have to imagine that most publishers actually have certain requirements that they sort of milestones they want games to hit if they're going to greenlight a sequel, if they're going to continue down the path with those franchise and characters. And when they don't meet those, it has to be something special or maybe a vanity project in order for that to continue, right? So like The Last Guardian, Sony has said rather publicly that there really wasn't any reason to continue that project except for the fact that fans kept asking for it. And although I don't have any insight into the development of that game specifically, I'm inclined to believe them that they mostly kept working on The Last Guardian and finding a way to continue that project kicking along, despite the fact that it really should have been done a long time ago. How is a game in development for 10 years and not find a way out? It's not actually 10 years, but it is closing in on a decade that game has been kicking around. We've seen nothing from Fumito Ueda since then, although he has set up a side studio since. So we may see something from the Ueda sooner rather than later, I feel. But I don't know. Like I said, I think it is all about how that is communicated, but I think there's a way in which publishers are just honest with their player base and say, look, like, these things have to make money for us to keep doing them. This isn't a charity. And so if they don't sell a certain amount or if they don't sort of reach a certain plateau, then we don't have a reason to keep doing them. So I think it's kind of all in how it's handled. I think it can be sinister and awful, and I think it can also just be being honest with the people who buy your games. Anonymous asks, over the years, I've seen many professional critics, both in the games industry and others, scoff at Kotaku over some of their articles that don't seem to have an important content in them, i.e. the most recent one was over an article that pretty much was just about a large anime figure. How do you feel regarding this criticism? I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, but I can't say I haven't felt similarly to these people in regards to Kotaku. Some of the articles are a bit too silly. I think you have to look at a site like Kotaku, especially if you put this in the context of like Giant Bomb, right? Like the only things that Giant Bomb really did were or continue to do are the things it wanted to do. Now, I think that's a little bit different with reviews, but even reviews are things that we wanted to do, right? There's very few things that happen on that site. When I was there, and I have to imagine it remains that way, they weren't because that's what we want to do. Like that's just what we want to wake up and do today. Whereas, but that's also baked in the business model, right? Like at Giant Bomb, there was a subscriber base in which that allows you to assume there's X amount of money coming in, kind of no matter what. Obviously that ebbs and flows, but it set a certain base expectation for what the site was capable of bringing in profitably. Whereas Kotaku is built around having a 24/7 sort of news network that isn't always about news. It's sometimes about culture, and to some degree, you have to fill that space. And so, I think that's more criticism of the business model than anything else. I think Kotaku, I can say I've been there for 6 months now. I watch a lot of the discussions that happen with these posts, and nothing is put up flippantly, but that doesn't mean every post hits the mark. It doesn't mean that something that someone puts up was necessarily the most content-rich thing in the world, but there's always effort put into that. There's always thought put into that, and I think you have to consider that in the context of how Kotaku makes money, and that is in having a lot of posts that go on the site that keep people coming to the site, that drive traffic. But one of the things I've noticed in the 6 months that I've been there has been upper management really encouraging folks to pull back on that, where they're very happy with the traffic numbers. And we have found that doing good reporting, writing really content-rich posts, do good traffic. And we don't have to fall into the pit of doing cheap stunts in order to drive things. That doesn't mean every post is going to hit, because there's just so much going on up on the site sometimes that inevitably there's going to be some stuff that doesn't quite hit. But feel free to call us out on it. Feel free to call me out on it if you feel like I'm falling to that trap. I'm always willing to have that conversation. Anonymous says, cheer up, Patrick. Zero Escape 3 is a real thing. Thank the Lord. I'm very much looking forward to Zero Escape 3. It's coming summer 2016. It sounds like they're still pretty early in production on Zero Escape 3, but it seemed like it was kind of dire straits for that franchise, which was never meant to be a franchise. But then 999 was sort of a cult hit, which then spawned the much larger budgeted VLR. And I sort of retain that 999 was a better game than VLR, but nonetheless, I'm very excited to see them hopefully finish out this story and see how it all kind of wraps up. I don't remember most of what happened in VLR. I mean, I enjoyed it. I liked the twists and turns, but I'm going to have to deep dive into a Wikipedia file in order to remember what's going on with VLR and setting up Zero Escape 3, of which they have not said they haven't settled on a subtitle yet. But in regards to the first question about sort of games selling a certain amount in order to get the sequel, I mean the creators have talked very publicly about the fact that VLR didn't sell enough, and that the third game was kind of put on the shelf, and the creator went off to go work on other things. But then when he told fans about the fact that the third game probably wasn't going to happen, the response to that is what prompted the development of the third one to kind of pick up and go forward. So, as with Zero Escape and Shenmue, if fans are persistent and continue to show their interest, sometimes crazy things can happen. Anonymous said, with it being nearly a year after Destiny's release, do you know why its story was of such poor quality and why it turned out the way it did? I don't have any particular deep insight into the development of Destiny. I also haven't really investigated it a whole lot because Jason Schreier and Kirk Hamilton have done a phenomenal job of tracking that game and covering that game for Kotaku, but also just I don't care that much about Destiny. I'm thinking about jumping in when the Taken King launches in September. Seems like a time where everything's been balanced and there'll be new content and people playing again. It's a time that I might jump in and check out what's been happening there and what has allowed so many people to fall in love with that game despite its many, many flaws. Cough, cough, Brad Shoemaker, cough, cough. But I do know, and I can say, that I've talked to people close around that project, and they are well aware of the criticisms around the story. They are well aware of how people feel about the narrative or the lack thereof, as the case may actually be. And it's something they are trying to address going forward. I cannot speak to the improvements or lack of improvements in the expansions that have come since the base game, but I do know that they looked at Destiny as being a disappointment from that perspective, and that it wasn't up to the Bungie standards, and that's something they hoped to address and work on in the games ahead. And I guess by games, I mean expansions and however they end up handling Destiny 2, of which I have no idea if that's what they'll end up calling it, but, at some point there will be, something really expansive and big that on the level of a brand new game. Or maybe it'll all be Taken King $40 style things. I actually don't know. The last time I even kind of poked around that, it sounded like things weren't even settled on how they were going to sort that stuff out. Anonymous says, Patrick, I've been really wondering lately, how does CD Projekt Red manage to consistently make these incredibly large and complex games on a smaller budget than similar but downright inferior, in my opinion, counterparts made in the US? The Witcher 3 was enormous and jam-packed full of playable content and beautiful writing with elaborate side quests, never mind the phenomenal main storyline and beautiful visuals. And free DLC too. What's going on here that they can manage this time and time again? Well, I think you also have to remember that CD Projekt Red has been scaling up. So what they pulled off in The Witcher was of a different scale than what they pulled off in The Witcher 2. What they pulled off in The Witcher 3 is on a different scale than they pulled off in The Witcher 2. That studio has slowly been working their way up from making action RPGs to sprawling open world games that aren't quite on the level of Bethesda pulls off in the last 10 years or so with, Oblivion and Fallout 3 and Skyrim and most likely with Fallout 4. But they're moving in that direction. And, what made me excited about The Witcher 3 was that they moved in the direction that I want Fallout 4 and whatever the next Elder Scrolls game is, which is, The Witcher's always had better combat, but not as interesting of a world. And I don't mean that from a character and lore perspective. I'm talking about like a big world you're exploring with systems interacting. Whereas the Bethesda games have that stuff down, but the combat always kind of falls apart. If not right away, then, 20 hours into the game, it just kind of becomes boring and rote, which is both the case for Fallout 3 and Skyrim. I didn't play Oblivion, but my guess is it falls into similar trappings. So I think it's just, proper planning on CD Projekt Red's parts. I haven't talked to them specifically. I couldn't provide you any particular insight into that, and I don't know anyone that works over there, but I think you will just, it looks like every time they kind of move up and up the scale, and it makes me awfully excited to see whatever they do next. I have to imagine that the success of The Witcher 3 means that they're going to be doing another Witcher. How that exactly plays out, I don't know. There are story consequences in The Witcher 3 that would be interesting to see them address or not address. But I do expect The Witcher to continue, and I'm also excited for their Cyberpunk game, who's 2097. I forget exactly what the full title is, but can't wait to play it because, you know what? CD Projekt Red is one of my favorite developers going right now. Love, love, love what they're doing. Anonymous asked, and this will be our final question, I'm still pretty upset about Ryan's passing. He's speaking to Ryan Davis, my former colleague over at Giant Bomb, who passed away just over 2 years ago as of now. I can only imagine what you guys feel, not to mention losing a father. I lost my father 3 years ago on the same day as Ryan's passing. Totally weird. It doesn't get much more heartbreaking than that. Sorry if that's phrased weird. Just wanted to let you know that my thoughts will be with you, and I wish you the best this weekend. So he wrote this before July 3rd. There is a blog post that I kind of updated and reshared called July 3rd, in which I sort of talk about my feelings about my father and Ryan Davis, of which I think I've talked about on 3 Beers Deep in the past. But the sentiments are certainly appreciated, and I've heard from so many folks in the last week or so who know that July 3rd is quite a trying day for me, my colleagues, my friends, my family. I'm hardly the only one affected in all of that, but nonetheless, the sentiments are really appreciated. It's as I've said in previous videos and things I've written and on Twitter, is that you try and keep those people in your thoughts. What's tragic is that you can't make new memories with people, and so you're stuck kind of clinging to the ones you already have. And in some ways, that's nice, and in some ways, it's very tragic because as time goes on and those memories deteriorate or become vague and, do the things that memories are wont to do, you don't replace them with new ones. And you're forced to scrounge the old ones for new details, whether you watch videos or photos or conversations with friends, constantly trying to fill in those details because you just don't want to forget them. But that's just how our brains work. That's just how memories change as life goes on. But the best thing you can do is live for them. You can't live in the past, but you can't forget them either. And I think the most honorable thing you can do is to try and live a good life. Try and do the things they would have wanted, not do the things they wouldn't have wanted you to do. but most of all, just cherish life. So I try to do that the best I can to honor the memories of my father and Ryan Davis, and I can only hope that I'm able to pull that off on a daily basis. But that does it. That is it for 3 Beers Deep. We will be back, as always, every week with a new batch of questions and answers. You can submit your own over at patrickklepek.tumblr.com, and I also answer those sometimes, most of the time, usually on a daily basis over there as well. And like I said at the top, Inventory Management is my podcast feed on iTunes, in which you can download things like this and other audio files that I put up from time to time. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and I'll see y'all next week.